But despite an important sense in which there is now an archive from which the injustices, exclusions and silences of the past can be brought into discussion and debate, I really want to suggest that we go beyond just gathering these texts into a Caribbean gay canon and only responding to those texts that identify their non-heterosexuality in knowable ways, and particularly knowable, I think, to established sort of gay identities and paradigms. What interests me is the quiet, glimpsed, messy, but very insistent repertoire of Caribbean queerness rather than homosexuality that I found in a lot of literary works. If we follow the pull of place over time, if we accept that the Caribbean is elsewhere rather than before or behind, as is often implied in the historical model, we need to bring them up to date, they're behind us, then we need to account for the possibility of an elected queerness that may not correspond exactly to established ideas of homosexuality. Also, I think, we need to be alert to and account for a queerness that's not erased by the absence of the touchstones of that coming out narrative of pride, assertion, display, outness, naming, parade. I did, and I couldn't find it again today to show you, but I did find on a website a coming out tutorial for young black men, as if they couldn't be properly gay unless they'd done this tutorial and you had to really come out properly. But I can't find it now. So my attention then is to a whole series of narratives in which these words, gay, homosexual, queer, are never mentioned. These texts represent the social density of Caribbean queer lives in which same-sex loving is represented in many contexts, variously, as part of a continuum of behaviours, as intimacy and desire with and sometimes without physical acts. They plot a range of intersections between rights and representation, giving full and complex subjectivity to Caribbean queer subjects as having social and familial lives, while also representing their right to love and live variously. So the kind of texts that I'm thinking of here are Clem Maharaj's The Dispossessed, Patricia Power's A Small Gathering of Bones, Shani Mutu's Serious Blooms at Night, Una Kempedu's Buxton Spice, Nigel H. Thomas's Spirits in the Dark, Lawrence Scott's Alder's Sin, and Ramabai Espinet's The Swinging Bridge. And there are lots more, actually. We can go kind of right back, really, to Solkey, perhaps even to the Naipaul's queer figure in A Way in the World, the flower arranger sitting quietly in that little place. And so I think there's lots and lots of kind of figures that we can pick up. I don't want to suggest in my reading of these texts that I have identified a Caribbean queer, a different style of sociability or of sexual relationships that's distinctive, stable and particular. In fact, given the intense heterogeneity of the Caribbean, of course there could be nothing as settled or homogenous as that. Rather, I just want us to be able to look for and to see a very textured continuum of locally determined queerness that might be read as a redescription of sexual identity as yet unthought of, and to UK and US gay rights and global queer theory. In places that have been colonised and subjected to various divisive and hierarchical identity politics, the particular styling of queer identity as individualistic, as rights-claiming, as naming, displaying, may not be the same route to liberation. Indeed, queerness may need to be quiet without being abject, without confirming the region as a closet. Going back to the literary as a form of redescribing the real then, what I want to do in my work is to make space for queer forms of queerness that express different historical yearnings that are locally sensitive and specific. And I see those yearnings as being entangled with that project of living together, living in societies ruined to some extent by colonialism and its political legacies, which include, of course, compromised and failed revolutions, and therefore living in societies that are strongly invested in that idea of making a people, of finding a way of living together. So one of the most obvious outcomes of my thinking then is to change the terms on which Caribbean subjects can participate and can be seen, can be made visible in transnational debates about about sexuality. It's very depressing that everywhere you just see homophobia, the dancehall. So all I'm going to do now is offer you a kind of reading of one text as a way possibly of going ahead with this project. And the writer I'm going to look at is Shani Mutsu and her latest work. Trinidadian Canadian resident Mutsu's work has come to be associated very strongly, I think, with the breaking of literary silence around sexuality and non-normalizing desire. Her novel Serious Blooms at Night, published in 1998, issued a roll call to some of the most sensitive issues around sexuality in the Caribbean: transgender identities, incest, rape, and queer subjects. Yet it's setting in a fictionalized but recognizably Caribbean island, and the diasporic identity of its author, as well as the spectacular retreat from the world of the social enacted by its protagonist Marla. All of those characteristics of the book, I think, mean that it wasn't taken really as an engagement with or a social critique of Caribbean sexual citizenship. It was often read as being magical realist instead of kind of socially engaged. In Mutsu's recent novel, Valmiki's Daughter, published 10 years later in 2008, she continues her project of representing lives of Caribbean queer subjects. In this case, there is Valmiki, the seemingly socially successful and sexually assured doctor, whose transgressions in the form of liaisons with local white women are kind of, I don't think they exactly mask his same-sex yearnings, but they compete alongside. So he's married to an Indian woman, he has affairs with white women, and he has a deep yearning for African men. So he's a fairly kind of... Sorry? Greedy. Busy. Yes, busy. Sorry, busy is a much better word. And I think that what's important about that is that he already sort of presents a queer leakage between homosexual and heterosexual identities. One's not really seen as false consciousness. You know, they kind of coexist and they might equally be real. The narrative of his queer life is followed by that of his daughter Viveka, whose affair with the French wife of a family friend is not unconnected, and we should bear this in mind, to her intellectual empowerment through attending the University of the West Indies, and her ambition to rearrange understandings of the possible in her vocation as a literary critic. The novel ends with both Valmiki and Viveka in heterosexual marriages, but there is no sense of sexual closure or normalization. Perhaps most importantly, this novel, like Sirius, has very many moments when the negotiation of one person's needs and desires alongside those of another becomes a matter of intense importance. This act of recognizing responsibility to others rather than simply claiming the rights of the self bends, I think, that question of self-definition in an interesting way. Not doing harm to another person is always a matter of heightened awareness in Mutsu's writing. In Valmiki's Daughter, Viveka thinks, in exchange for honesty, integrity, a lifetime of service, she prayed that she and all people like her be granted the freedom, so long as it did not hurt anyone, to love whomever they chose, to love well, and to have that love returned without judgment. And it's that kind of clause that I think is quite interesting in there, so long as it did not hurt anyone. Where Valmiki's Daughter departs significantly from Sirius, though, is that it's set very firmly in Trinidad's San Fernando. Indeed, the novel quite literally positions its reader, navigates their place street by street, sound by sound, smell by smell. We're positioned then within a recognisable and sensate social world with all its damning and disappointing realities, a world of middle-class and middle-brow families and their entrenched prejudices, self-interests and deceits. But it's also a world in which difference and heterogeneity crowd the horizon. When we first land in the book, and we literally are dropped into it, What you see on the horizon is this street where the Anglican church, the Catholic church is there alongside shops, there's a convent and an Indian movie theatre. And she doesn't just represent this as a kind of cultural mélange of Trinidad, but also what she represents is that there's no boundaries between these. So she talks about how the noise from the Indian movie theatre actually leaks into the convent, so while the girls are having their lessons, they have this other script going through their minds. And that seepage between seemingly distinct ways of living is also echoed in the mobility between different ways of loving that the book represents, blurring the lives between this choice that either we're